Have you ever sat quietly at the end of the day when all the noise is gone and a question suddenly shows up in your mind? What if I had started earlier? It wasn't some huge dream, just something you once wanted to do, a skill you said you'd learn, a plan you once promised yourself. You didn't give it up. You just said today wasn't the right time. You told yourself there was still time, that tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow has a quiet way of slipping by. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't push you. It just moves a little further away. A week passes, then a month, then a year. And somehow, years pass the same way. Your life doesn't fall apart. You still go to work, still see people, still live a life that's fine enough. But deep inside, there's a light feeling you don't want to look at. It's not failure. It's regret. Regret that you could have tried. Regret that you could have started sooner. Regret isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in one day. It grows from all the times you chose comfort over one small step forward. And one day, you realize what makes your heart heavy isn't what you did wrong. It's what you never dared to begin. Marcus lived in a small town by the sea. In the mornings, the air smelled like salt. Fishing boats came back before the sun was high. He was 28. He worked 6 days a week at a seafood processing plant. Every morning, he stood by a long metal table, sorting fish, packing ice boxes, doing the same moves from 7 to 4. The job wasn't too hard. The pay wasn't great, but it covered rent, covered food, covered a few small weekend treats. And that was the dangerous part. Marcus wasn't starving, wasn't in crisis, wasn't backed into a corner. He was just comfortable enough not to change. Each day looked like the last. No big problems, no big motivation, just repetition. Sometimes, when he looked at the waves in the distance, he wondered if he could do something else. But the question never stayed long. A comfort gently pulled him back. A familiar chair, a familiar TV show, a familiar routine. He didn't realize that sometimes what keeps us stuck isn't struggle. It's being just comfortable enough to forget we once wanted more. There was a time Marcus wasn't like this. In school, he was one of the top students. He was good with numbers, really good. Teachers said he thought fast and clearly. A career advisor once suggested finance or accounting. Some even said he could work at a big bank in the city. Back then, Marcus believed it. He looked at the future with excitement. But in his final year of high school, his father got sick. The family needed money. Marcus left school to work. He told himself it was temporary, just a few months. When things settled down, he'd go back. But life didn't circle back the way he thought. A few months became a year. A year became many. Dreams don't disappear in a day. They just get placed to the side. His younger sister chose a different path. She worked during the day, studied online at night. Marcus often saw her still at her desk close to midnight. He told her she should rest more, that life is short, no need to push so hard. She just smiled and said that because life is short, she didn't want to wait. The difference between them wasn't talent. It was the choices they repeated every day. Things went on like that until one Sunday afternoon. The family gathered for their mom's birthday. Nothing special, just a small table, a few familiar dishes, soft laughter in an old house. After the candles were blown out, their mom stood up to say a few words. She looked at Lena first, her eyes full of pride. She said she knew how hard her daughter had worked, working during the day, studying at night, and now she had a good job. The whole room clapped. Lena blushed, looked down. Then their mom turned to Marcus. She didn't criticize, didn't compare. She just said softly that she believed he would find his own path too. It was a gentle sentence. But in that moment, Marcus felt his chest grow heavy. He understood what was behind it. Not anger, but tired waiting. His mom no longer expected big things. No, she just hoped he would be okay. That night, Marcus sat alone on the back porch. The sea in front of him was dark. The wind was cold. And for the first time in years, he couldn't tell himself that everything was fine. The next morning, Marcus walked past the town community center. He had passed it hundreds of times, but never walked in. That day, he stopped. Not because someone called him, but because inside, he didn't want to go back to his old routine like nothing had happened. Inside, an older man was arranging old books. His name was Mr. Alvaro, a retired math teacher. Now he spent his time helping people who wanted to start again. He looked at Marcus for a while and said he looked like someone carrying something heavy. Marcus didn't know what to say. The man didn't lecture. He placed 2 bags in front of him, one small, one large. He told Marcus to lift the small one first. It was light, almost nothing. Then the large one. Marcus's shoulder dropped as soon as he lifted it. The small bag, he said, is discipline. Waking up a bit earlier, studying when you don't feel like it, doing the right thing even when no one sees. It's not comfortable, but you can carry it every day. The large bag is regret. Each time you delay, it's like adding one small stone. At first, you don't feel it, but after years, it becomes too heavy. Marcus put the large bag down, and for the first time, he clearly saw what he had been carrying for 10 years. Marcus didn't speak right away. He just looked at the 2 bags lying on the floor. One almost weightless, one heavy enough to shake his shoulder in seconds. He realized he'd gotten used to that heavy feeling for too long. Mr. Alvaro didn't push him. He just said Marcus couldn't go back and make the big bag lighter. 10 years wouldn't disappear, but he could stop adding more stones. Starting today, Marcus asked what he should do first. The answer was simple. One small thing, repeated daily. He used to be good at math. So start with numbers, 3 times a week, 1 hour before work, not when he felt inspired, but on time. The first weeks were hard. His body wanted more sleep. His mind whispered that missing 1 day wouldn't change anything. But every morning like that, Marcus remembered the 2 bags, and he chose the lighter one. There was no big breakthrough. Just a man sitting at a desk before sunrise, quietly starting again. The first few weeks moved slowly. Nothing magical happened. Marcus still went to work every day, still stood at the same metal table. But inside, something began to shift. After about 2 months, he noticed he no longer had to look up every simple formula. Numbers started to feel clearer. Problems didn't confuse him like before. But the biggest change wasn't knowledge. It was how he saw himself. He stood a little straighter, spoke with more certainty. He no longer avoided the question when someone asked about his future. One afternoon, the factory manager announced they needed someone to handle inventory and records. It involved paperwork. The pay was almost double. 3 people applied. Marcus was one of them. During the interview, he didn't talk about big dreams. He simply handed over his notebook. 4 months of steady practice. a basic certificate from Mr. Alvaro's class. The manager looked at him a little longer than usual, and for the first time in years, Marcus didn't just feel hopeful. He felt ready. A few days after the interview, Marcus was called into the office. He walked in with a heavy heartbeat, but calmer than before. The manager said they had reviewed everything carefully, and they were giving him the role. Not because he had worked there the longest, but because he showed he was willing to learn again. The new job wasn't fancy. No private office, no big title. Just a different desk, an old computer, and numbers instead of boxes of ice. But to Marcus, it wasn't just a new position. It was proof. Proof that 4 months of small discipline weren't pointless. Proof that 1 hour each morning could slowly change the direction of a life. On his first day in the new role, he thought about the heavy bag again. It was still there in his memory. 10 years didn't disappear. But he realized something important. The bag wasn't getting heavier anymore. He'd stopped adding stones, and that alone made his heart feel lighter. Time moved slowly. Marcus didn't stop at the new job. He knew if he wanted to go further, he had to keep carrying the small bag every day. So after a year, he signed up for an online accounting program. He worked during the day, studied at night. Some nights his eyes burned from exhaustion. Some nights he wondered if he was trying too late. But this time, he didn't argue with himself for long. He was used to showing up on time, used to doing the work even when no one clapped. Discipline slowly became habit. Habit slowly became who he was. One evening, Lena called. She said their mom told her he had started studying again. Her voice sounded surprised and happy. Marcus smiled softly. He admitted it took him years to understand something simple. It's never too late to begin again. At the next family dinner, their mom looked at both her children with calm, warm eyes. No more tired waiting. Just quiet pride. Marcus's story isn't about getting rich. It isn't about a dramatic turning point that changed the whole world. It's simply about a man who stopped lying to himself. He understood he couldn't go back and fix the years that were gone. 10 years are still 10 years. Missed chances don't return the same way. But he understood something else too. The past can't get lighter, but the future can still be different. Every day, we stand in front of 2 small choices. One is easy. Delay again. The other is slightly harder. Take one small step. No one chooses regret in a single day. It's built from hundreds of harmless-looking choices. And no one changes a life in one morning either. Change comes from showing up again and again when no one is watching. If you're listening to this and thinking you're already too late, pause for a moment. You can't erase the years behind you, but you can stop making them heavier starting today. Maybe you don't need a giant leap, just one small step, repeated daily, and believe your heart still deserves another chance to begin again.